Thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to participate. Thank you to Tom Pritchard yesterday and others, Andrew and others at Jersey Dairy for the hospitality I received. Very much appreciated. So I've been asked to talk about methane. I've been talking about farting cows for a long, long time, and so I'm very pleased to come and talk to you about methane production for cows again today. What I wanted to do was really to focus a little bit more generally about some of the issues around the sustainability of dairy production, and then I'll drill down and talk in more detail about methane production, just what causes cows to produce methane and what some of the factors are, and what we can do about it, what some of the options are for mitigation going forward. So, as we heard this morning, there's been a fairly substantial increase in the demand for dairy products globally, and much of that has been occurring in Asia. There's been an increase in population in that part of the world and growing economies, so more discretionary income for purchase of dairy products. And so there's been a huge increase in demand. We've been hearing a lot in the news in the last few weeks following the IPCC report about the need for us to consume less meat, consume less dairy products, because of, in particular, because of the methane production associated with ruminant meat and milk production. So some of us may decide to have meat-free Mondays and consume less meat and dairy products. But there's going to be an increasing demand for dairy products in spite of that. And so we really do believe that sustainable dairy production strategies are needed, and strategies that can be applied across diverse production systems. So there is no one-size-fits-all in terms of trying to address some of these issues. Obviously, I don't come from very close to here, but the North American model is not the model that's going to be applicable to all dairy production systems globally. There are a number of sustainability issues. The person that just spoke touched on a number of these in terms of animal production and dairy production systems. Economic forces are extremely important. Social issues are important, and in particular, issues around animal welfare and also around human nutrition and health. We do a lot of work at our research facility on the effects of milk composition on human health, good and bad, and we need to address that as well. But what we talk the most about, and the area that we've worked the most in, is on environmental impact. Again, you touched on some of those issues in the previous speaker. We've worked a lot in the area on pollution, okay, in terms of we look at what goes into a cow and comes out of a cow. For years as a nutritionist, we focused on milk production, but more recently we've been a lot more concerned about the pee and the poo and also the methane that comes out of the cows, because they do have an environmental impact that needs to be addressed. The FAO report in 2006 raised a number of issues about animal agriculture and the environment. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas. It has 25 times the global warming potential averaged over 100 years of CO2. And it's something we hear a lot about in the news. Nitrogen is also important. We increasingly are working more and more on nitrogen efficiency. Nitrogen is a source of nitrates, eutrophication, water quality issues, but also nitrous oxide, which has 300 times the global warming potential of CO2. And agriculture in the UK accounts for 2/3 of the nitrous oxide inventory. Okay? And then, of course, ammonia. I don't think anybody's mentioned ammonia today, but it's an air quality issue, a human health issue, has environmental impact. And legislation that has been affecting concentrated livestock operations in North America is coming to Europe, to the UK, without question. There's also issues around phosphorus, other issues around manure in terms of smells and flies and antimicrobial resistance that we need to be aware of. The water footprint of dairy production is also important, and then land use change. A lot of the big numbers in terms of the contribution of animal agriculture to CO2 production, or in other words, the carbon footprint of animal production. A lot of the big numbers are tied to associating deforestation of the Amazon and releasing carbon from deforestation as being caused by the need for soybean production for animal agriculture. Okay? And so there's a lot of questions about whether those associations are correct or not. But there are a lot of issues around land use change that need to be addressed. But methane is the one that's been in the news. I first talked to the news media about methane production from cows and global warming almost 30 years ago when I was working in America. And this image of cows killing the planet is a very serious one, but it also has a humorous side. Everybody chuckled when I said farting cows. You know, the cartoons are about feeding beans to cows, and it's going to have a negative effect on the environment. News editors like this story because it has a serious side and it has a humorous side. Okay, 10 years ago almost, there's Lord Stern, the climate chief, came out and said we should stop eating meat. It was repeated about 10 days ago in the news. We should stop eating meat because of methane production. So it is a very serious issue, and it's one, again, that has received a lot of research attention. Just some numbers in terms of carbon footprint. Agriculture in the UK is accounting for about 10% of the UK's carbon footprint. Other industries have reduced to a greater extent than agriculture. So agriculture's carbon footprint has decreased, in part just due to decreased cow numbers, okay, or animal numbers. But other industries like waste management, landfills, their management has changed drastically, and so their methane emissions are hugely reduced. So agriculture is accounting for an increasing proportion. So it means that it's under more and more scrutiny. But in general, in terms of methane, agriculture accounts for about 51% of the UK's methane inventory. So the dairy industry, there's been a lot of concern about this for a long time. Again, the FAO report in 2006 received a lot of attention. And I think globally the dairy industry has been very proactive in terms of responding to this challenge. Okay? And in the UK and also in North America, the dairy industry's got together these roadmaps for improving sustainability. Okay? And it should be applauded for taking action in this regard. Okay? So we've looked at this in some detail. In North America, in the United States, the DMI, the Levy Board, commissioned a very extensive life cycle analysis by the University of Arkansas of the North American dairy industry, and to help develop this another roadmap for improving sustainability. So that, again, they did this very detailed life cycle analysis of dairy product production, from grass to glass. You know, there's so many of these phrases that come out. But from food production for cows through to the carbon cost of consumers refrigerating the milk in their kitchens. Okay, where are all the emissions that contribute to the carbon footprint of milk production and dairy product production? And based on this, if we just focus on a glass of milk, in terms of liquid milk production, this is for the United States, then 51% of that carbon footprint is attributable to on-farm emissions. And that's largely enteric methane emission. Okay? And some manure emission, some methane arises from manure storage and manure handling, but a large part of that is enteric methane emission. When we say enteric methane emission, the methane is produced by microorganisms in the cow's digestive tract that is breaking down fiber and other components of her food. Okay? And that generates methane. And the same thing happens in manure storage as well. Through that microbial action, the archaea are the specific microbes that produce the methane. Okay? And by the way, that's not farted. 98% of the methane produced by a cow is either eructated or belched, or just exhaled from her lungs. Okay? It's absorbed into her blood and it leaves her body through her lungs, or she belches it. Okay? So it's not farted, it's eructated. Okay? But it is a major source, it is a major component of the greenhouse gas or the CO2 footprint, the carbon footprint of milk production. And so it's something, again, that's received a lot of research attention. So these dairy sustainability roadmaps, they've not just focused on how to reduce methane emission, or that's very important. On-farm approaches that might improve feed efficiency, that might improve health. I'll come back to this, but reducing age of first calving. it has a huge effect on milk's CO2 footprint because it reduces the amount of time you're feeding animals that aren't producing milk. Okay, so improved health, improved fertility has a huge effect. But reducing enteric methane is a potential strategy for reducing the carbon footprint of milk production. Not just, and in addition to all the things that can be done in terms of transport and processing and storage. So, ruminant methane production, it has been a really hot topic in terms of research. It's mind-boggling how much money has been spent around the world on studying how much methane cows produce and what we can do about it. Seriously, there has been very serious money. There is an international conference on greenhouse gases in animal agriculture that's held every 3 years. And my first one I went to was in Banff. They were expecting 300 scientists to appear, and they had almost 500 that showed up. There's so many people that have been working in this area. They had similar conferences in Ireland in 2013, also in Melbourne in 2016, and the next one's going to be in Brazil next year. And the interest in this area, or in these conferences, just reflects the amount of research activity that's ongoing. But it's not a new topic. In studying energy metabolism, which is what got me into studying methane emission from cows, we often put cows in respiration chambers to measure their oxygen consumption in order to estimate their heat production. So we want to know how much heat a cow produces in order to study her energy metabolism. But we also need to know how much energy she loses from her diet as methane. And up to 10% of her feed energy that she consumes can be lost as methane. So while the cows are in respiration chambers for studying energy metabolism, we get a very precise measurement of the amount of methane they produce. Okay, so we have a really large database of measurements of methane production from cows from studies of energy metabolism. And we have these respiration chambers at Cedar and have long been studying the amount of methane cows produce because it's related to the cow's energy metabolism. Okay? So, but ruminant nutritionists have been doing this for 150 years. So this paper in 1940 from Penn State University, it summarizes data going back to 1902, looking at how a cow's diet affects her methane emission. And it showed quite clearly that the main determinant was the amount of fermentable carbohydrates she consumes, the cellulose, the hemicellulose, and the fibrous component, and the starch. It's the main determinant, how much she eats that's fermented in her rumen. So since then, there's been a number of these summaries of data from energy metabolism studies. And my colleagues, I used to work at Beltsville and for USDA. My mentors, Henry Terrell and Paul Moe, published this summary, again showing how much carbohydrate, digestible carbohydrate a cow eats, determines how much methane she produces. Curtis Gessner, a very famous German scientist, published a similar review. More recently, as a global initiative, we pulled together 3,500 measurements of methane production by cows. It was published in Global Change Biology this year, and came up with the same conclusion. So, no matter, I keep telling everyone, we don't need more data from cows. We know what determines how much methane a cow produces. It's how much she eats and how fermentable that material that she eats is. Okay. So, again, we've looked at this, I've been through this. It's a very intense area of research. This is some of our data at the Center for Dairy Research across a range, so I should point with this, across a range of feed dry matter intakes of cattle. The amount of methane they produce here in megajoules per day is primarily determined by how much they eat, okay? But there's a lot of variation. For a given level of feed intake, the amount of methane produced, and that's what we call methane yield, varies. And so we're really interested in this variation. And what we'd like to do is we know we're not going to obliterate methane production, but what we'd like to do is push this line down. So the amount of methane produced per unit of feed is reduced. Okay? And hopefully, perhaps, the amount of increases can be, with increased intake, can be reduced as well. And a lot of this has to do with the type of diet that the cows are fed, and some of it has to do with the genetics of the cows. And there's a lot of interest, again, globally, in developing selection indices, partly based on genomic evaluation for improved feed efficiency, but also for reduced methane yield. So we know that methane production by individual cows is a heritable trait, and we can select for the amount of cows that produce less methane. The big question is, what else are we selecting for when we select for that trait? So another issue with this is level of intake. So this is just comparing, this is from a study we did at Beltsville. It included some Jersey cows, comparing dry and lactating cows. Obviously, lactating cows produce more methane because they're eating more feed, okay? But the methane emission as a percent of the intake energy is actually higher for the dry cows. And one approach the IPCC takes in, the Tier 2 approach used in the UK for methane inventory is methane is a percentage of intake energy of cows, okay? In lactating dairy cows, that's what's used for the UK inventory. But that relationship is affected by level of intake. So methane per unit dry matter intake is considerably higher for a dry cow than for a lactating cow. And that's because as cows eat more, the rate of passage of feed through the digestive tract increases. It goes through more quickly, so there's less time for methane emission. And the dry matter digestibility for the dry cow fed the exact same diet as a lactating cow was higher, and that's associated with more methane emission. And the other thing to mention is what we call methane intensity. And that's the amount of methane per unit of milk produced, okay? And that is often corrected for solids or energy milk yield, okay? And so what you see is that methane per unit of milk energy, or methane intensity, decreases with higher yielding animals. And so that suggests that intensification, higher yielding cows, is a strategy for reducing methane intensity. And basically what this means is there's a maintenance methane emission associated that is going to occur, and you're diluting that maintenance cost of methane emission by having higher yielding cows. Again, this isn't the approach this isn't a solution for every dairy producer, but it just emphasizes that there is this relationship. And a lot of inventories are looking at methane intensity in terms of methane per unit product. In terms of dietary strategies, we've long known that one of the most effective feed supplements for dairy cows that will reduce methane emission is supplemental fat, or lipid. Okay? It's because it brings energy into the diet of a cow that's not fermentable by the microbes in the rumen. So it doesn't bring fermentation that yields hydrogen that results in methane emission. And across a number of studies, we've shown that feeding fat to dairy cows decreases methane emission, usually by 10 to 15%, something like that. The other advantage of fat is it often increases milk yield. Depends on the type of fat that's being fed. And so methane intensity, methane per unit milk, is reduced even further. Okay? The other potential advantage is a change in milk fatty acid composition. Again, we've done a lot of work. We worked with Marks and Spencers for years on producing milk that has a lower saturated fatty acid composition because of the human health concerns around it. And so by feeding something like a crushed full-fat rapeseed, which is a really good feed for dairy cows, then it reduces methane emission, it increases milk yield, and it also reduces saturates in milk. So it produces what's perceived to be a more healthy product. The problem is the cost and the availability. If we fed every dairy cow in the UK crushed rapeseed, it wouldn't be available. We'd have to stop growing wheat, we'd have to stop growing potatoes. We just don't have enough rape production. And this year, of course, rape production is well down, and even rapeseed meal is in short supply. Okay, so we need to think about the availability of a supplement like this, and what it's going to cost, and why a farmer would want to pay for it. There's been a huge interest in various dietary additives, things like dicarboxylic acid, fumarate. It's used in the baking industry to make tortillas crispy. It's called baked sugar. And in vitro, in a lab, and in sheep, you feed it to them, it reduces methane emission. It doesn't touch methane emission in dairy cows. We fed up to 2 kilos of this stuff, and it had no effect on the methane emission. Dairy cows are not sheep. Their microbes in the rumen are different, and their digestive physiology is just different. There's also various additives like nitrates and sulfates, and we've known for 80 years that they reduce methane emission. The chlorohydrocarbons, things like chloroform, they have a structure very similar to methane, so they inhibit methane emission. Provimi, or now Cargill, have a patent on feeding nitrate. It's very effective at reducing methane emission. The problem with it is it's toxic if you feed too much. So whether it actually ever be used in practice is not certain. There's a lot of talk about in beef production replacing urea nitrogen with nitrate, and there's been a lot of interest in that in Australia. And it is one way that will very effectively reduce methane emission by ruminants. There's also been a lot of work on different plant components, potential green antibiotics. Okay, and some of these have been shown to be effective, but not reliably so. The tannins in particular can have anti-methanogenic effects that result in less methane emission. And then finally, specific enzyme inhibitors. I just want to mention a couple of these. One of them that's been in the news a lot over the years is garlic oil. Garlic oil contains some antimicrobial compounds. Allicin is one of them. It's a disulfide compound. Protects the garlic from microbial invasion if the garlic bulb is damaged. Okay, but it's very potent antibiotic properties and does reduce methane emission in sheep. Quite a bit of work at Aberystwyth, Jamie Newbold's work showed this. We fed Allicin to lactating dairy cows. Same story. Had no effect on methane emission, but boy did it produce some lovely garlic flavored milk. We worked with a company, Flavor Tech, that has a rotary evaporation system for capturing flavors, and they showed us that they could remove that garlic taint, but the carbon footprint of doing all that, and then of course it didn't affect methane emission. It was a non-starter. There is currently a garlic-based compound on the market, and I know some producers that supply milk to the barista market in London that are feeding it so they can say their milk has a lower methane emission associated with it. So whether it's actually working or not is another story. The most recent thing that's been in the news a lot is seaweed. And there's a particular type of seaweed grown around Australia. It's a red seaweed. It contains a bromoform that's very similar to chloroform. And it is a very potent inhibitor of methane emission. Okay? You can't feed very much of it to sheep before they stop eating their feed, but it is very effective, and there's a lot of interest in this globally right now in terms of finding other types of seaweed that we might be able to feed to cattle or sheep and reduce methane emission. But it's those bromide-containing seaweeds that are having an effect. We've also done some work with DSM, who sell vitamins and minerals and feed additives to the industry, and they've actually used cloud computing to develop a 3D structure of the active site of the enzyme that's the last step in methane synthesis. And then they invented a compound to inhibit that, to interact with that active site. And it's called 3-nitrooxypropanol, and it's very effective at reducing methane emission. Okay? It reduces it consistently by 30 to 40%, with so far no negative effect. And they're currently doing quite a lot of registration trial work to develop a dossier for getting that approved. If it comes on the market, the big question is, okay, why would somebody pay DSM for this product to reduce methane emission in their cows? What's the advantage other than doing the right thing by having cows that produce less methane? I think initially it could be something that specific pools may adopt in terms of say, for example, Marks and Spencer's. I'm just pulling a name out of the air. May say, okay, we're going to pay you more for your milk if you'll feed nitroxypropanol to your cows. Okay. So we'll have a milk pool that has a lower methane emission intensity. And then the final thing we can do is just do the best job we can in terms of formulating diets. High quality forages. A big factor in methane emission is the amount of fiber in the diet relative to the amount of starch, and the quality of the fiber, the digestibility of the fiber. So we've shown in a number of studies that changing cows from higher grass silage to higher maize silage diets reduces methane emission. We also did some work looking at different types of forages. We did a trial for DEFRA where we looked at comparing ryegrass to pastures that had more species, multi-species swords, herbal legs. I initially called this our weed paddock. Okay, it was the most expensive seed we ever purchased. It was conservation literature. Most difficult to get to establish. You wouldn't think weeds would be hard to establish, but they're only a weed when you don't want them to grow somewhere. When you want them to grow somewhere, they can be challenging. And they reduce methane emission. And that's led us to quite a bit of other work on multi-species swords. And I just want to mention that because increasingly we've gone from looking at what goes into a cow and comes out of a cow to what goes into a production system and comes out of a production system, that life cycle analysis. And the advantages of some of these multi-species swords is, especially if they include legumes, is they require less or no nitrogen fertilizer. And nitrogen fertilizer has a big impact in terms of carbon footprint and nitrous oxide and nitrate production lost in the environment. Cows are very inefficient at using their dietary nitrogen anyway, but we lose a lot of nitrogen when we apply nitrogen fertilizer. The other advantage of some of these multi-species swords is they often have deep rooting species that improve soil structure and soil health, okay? And they're very drought and flood resilient. So we've got a big project currently going at Reading looking at multi-species swords. And then they also reduce methane emission. Okay, so there's a lot of advantage of these. And again, I've gone from talking about my weed paddock to my lovely herbal legs. Okay? So my attitude's changed a lot. Finally, if I've got just a couple of minutes, just say something else about nitrogen efficiency, because I think we shouldn't just get focused too much on methane. We need to consider all the other aspects of our production systems and the efficiencies associated with milk production. And cows, again, are very inefficient at using nitrogen. This is nitrogen efficiency in terms of milk nitrogen per unit nitrogen intake. And we know that two things, that as we feed less nitrogen or less protein, cows become more efficient in using that protein. So we've had a long-term project for DEFRA. 6.5 years, we fed cows over 3 lactation, 210 cows over 3 lactations, diets with different nitrogen levels or protein levels, and looking at long-term effects in terms of nitrogen efficiency. And those cows fed less protein are much more efficient. But again, this is the same data set I showed you for methane, just looking at nitrogen efficiency. We've got this variability, and we've been really interested in that variability. And for our project, over 3 lactations, these are individual cows fed 3 levels of dietary protein. And look at the variability across those cows in terms of their nitrogen efficiency. And we've shown with Jamie Newbold that some of that is related to the microorganisms in their rumen, and it's very repeatable over lactation. We also think there's a genetic component to it, a cow genetic component. And so again, I think in future we need to be thinking about selecting cows that are more efficient, that produce less methane, and use their nitrogen more efficiently. And this just emphasizes one versus the other. This is a study where less nitrogen fertilizer is used, which improved nitrogen efficiency, but the animals consuming those swords that had less nitrogen fertilizer, the quality of the sword was less, so they produced more methane. So you had improved nitrogen efficiency, but more methane emission. So you don't want to have to adopt a strategy to reduce methane emission that results in more nitrogen emission. Okay, so you have to look at the whole system. So in terms of reducing greenhouse gases, there's a lot of approaches we can take for methane. Dietary carbohydrate has a major effect. It's basically the amount of fermentable material a cow consumes. But the ratio of starch to fiber has an effect. There are a number of supplements that are on the market or are coming on the market that are effective, but they cost money. Okay? And again, reductions for some of these observed in sheep just don't happen in dairy cows. With protein, I think we need to adopt strategies of feeding protein more precisely and closer to the cow's requirement. Herd level, we just need to be as efficient as possible. Reduce that overhead of non-producing or low-producing animals, have good health and fertility, calve at 2 years of age, not at 3 years of age, has a huge impact on carbon footprint. And I think in future we'll be selecting cows that are more efficient. I'm absolutely certain of that. In terms of improving sustainability, the industry's been improving since first use of sticks for farming. Okay, we just continue to adopt new technologies, improve management practices, and I think genetics are really important. And the right genetics in terms of the cows and the plants for the production system. Okay, one size does not fit all. And we just need to be honest and carefully assess on a life cycle basis the carbon footprint of our production systems from grass to glass. I really do mean that. And we need to consider the potential benefits and roles of more intensive systems for some production systems or for some purposes, and more extensive systems. Because the virtue of a cow is their ability to convert grass that we can't eat into milk that we can eat. And we just should never forget that. So, thank you very much.